Hello, scholars. I've asked you this question, and I'll probably ask it again, but what makes for good communication? Now, I would say that good writing usually works for its target audience. It usually works for its intended purpose, and it usually fits into the boundaries of what's acceptable and what's cool or interesting in society at a given time. Now, before we go any further, I want to introduce you to a word. The word is rhetoric. Now, if you've heard this word before, you probably heard it with regards to the third definition on the page here: speech or discourse that pretends to significance but lacks true meaning. As in, all the politician says is mere rhetoric. Now, when we're talking about rhetoric in this way, we're talking about like a speech that sounds good, it sounds pretty, but it's really empty. It doesn't have anything of significance to say. When we talk about rhetoric, though, I'd like to focus on those top two definitions: the study of the technique of using language effectively, the art of using speech to persuade, influence, or please. So in other words, rhetoric is the art of effective communication. Now, if we do a rhetorical analysis, what we're doing is analyzing a writer's or a speaker's choices regarding communication. How did they choose to begin? What word choices did they use? What stories, what examples did they use? Now, I'd also like to bring up another word here, and that word is text. Now, if you think of the word text, you're probably thinking of printed words on the page, and certainly printed words on a page are text, right? But let's broaden that definition slightly to include books, movies, ads, speeches. Even the interior design of a given room could be a text. So basically, when we say text, we're talking about anything we're going to analyze. Now, when I think about the relationship of text and author, audience, purpose, all these things, I'd like to arrange it this way, and you'll see other sort of rhetorical models that have different parts or arrange them differently, but this is what works for me here. So we have an author who creates some sort of a text written for some sort of audience with some purpose in mind. Okay, and all of this is happening in some larger context. And by context, we're talking about the time and the place that communication is happening. So let's dive in and let's look specifically at the idea of the author. Now, for many types of writing, the author feels very invisible. If you're reading a good story, it doesn't matter whether the author was a man or a woman or what their background was or whether you'd like that person personally if you met them. Okay, but for other types of writing, the author definitely needs to try to portray him or herself in a particular way in order to fulfill the purpose. So a good example of this is, say, a political ad. In a political ad, the speaker or the author, and we're just going to go ahead and consider the politician the author because they always say, I'm so-and-so and I approve this message. They definitely want to convey a certain impression of themselves, right? An impression that they're a leader, that they're competent, that they're someone who knows what they're doing. Now, when we talk about trying to persuade people based on our character, the term for that is ethos. Now, you may have heard of logos or logos and pathos or pathos, depending on how people pronounce them. Okay, and those are appeals to your logic or to your emotion. So people might try to persuade you with facts, or they might try to persuade you by making you feel sad or feel angry. Okay, but they also might try to persuade you by convincing you that they are someone that you can trust. Now, how about the writing that you're going to do? How does all this apply? Well, certainly in school, if you want to come across as credible, you have to put in the work to, you present that picture of yourself as an author by putting in the work to proofread, to do an assignment well, to have something interesting to say. And certainly when it comes to other types of writing, for example, resumes, you definitely have a purpose of presenting yourself as an author, as an employee, as someone who's competent, who knows what they're doing. And of course, the way to do that with a resume is to make sure it looks good, to make sure that you've followed sort of the standard format of a resume so that things are in the right place, to make sure you've proofread carefully. Now, some questions we might ask about an author. We might ask what their background is, what their biases are, what their qualifications are. Okay, and for ourselves as an author, we might ask, how do I come across as trustworthy, credible, likable, a leader? Again, if that's my purpose. Or maybe we ask, how do I come across as someone who's cool and hip and a bad boy?